Hello, School Transportation Nation. Tony Corpin here with School Transportation News. Glad you made it to the podcast. It's brought to you by Transfinder, the leader in school bus routing software. Also, I have Mr. Ryan Gray with me, co-host. Ryan, welcome.
Hey, everybody. It's always a pleasure to sit down with you guys and talk about school transportation.
Excellent. Ryan's talking with Jason Hewlett, who is the keynote speaker at STN EXPO Indianapolis. A little bit later, he is the youngest inductee in the prestigious Speakers Hall of Fame. So he is a great guy to talk to about leadership, inspiring people. I can't wait for that conversation, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. He really knocked the socks off of everybody in Reno in last December. So we're happy to have him out to the Crossroads of America next month.
Yeah, and speaking of STN EXPO Indianapolis, May 13th is the official closing of registration. So if you've drug your feet, it's you don't have much time left to go sign up, lock in your rate, get a hotel room, come out. The agenda is chock full of great content. We've got tons in there about electrification, maintenance, safety, anything you could possibly know about school transportation with professional development in mind. We've got you covered. Also, we've got STN EXPO in Reno, Nevada. We have our early bird registration deadline coming up in June on that as well. So do not drag your feet there. Make sure you save $100. We also have that Green Bus Summit, Transportation Director Summit. There's a lot for anyone to get out of our conferences. So please go check that out. STNExpo.com for all the details. And before I jump into the headlines with Ryan, have you guys heard of the Transfinder Trifecta? That's Route Finder Plus, Stop Finder, Wayfinder, 3 solutions that work seamlessly together. Just look at everything it includes: routing software, parent app, driver app, inventory management solution, location intelligence, the most accurate maps on the planet. Transfinder is the all-in-one solution that providers need and want. You got to have it for your transportation department. They've built a solution around what their clients need, because sometimes you don't know what you need, but they've got you covered. They can make it. Custom solutions from Transfinder, they're the best. Email them, getplus@transfinder.com. Call them at 800-373-3609 to see how they can help you. All right, Ryan, let's take a deep dive. We got the May issue out now. Ryan, what is in store for our readers of the May issue?
You know, there's quite a bit. So we're looking at articles on the development of AI with video cameras. A big topic right now for a lot of folks is the 3G sunset. So any of those telecommunications devices, GPS, anything that relies on cellular data. You know, a lot of you have already gone through your fleets and updated to the latest 4G or maybe 5G. We have an article that dives into that. A lot of emergency preparedness, Tony. There's been a lot of safety incidences, security incidences around school buses, in school buses this past school year. Of course, tragically, we had that school bus driver in Pasco, Washington, murdered, stabbed to death behind the wheel. Just horrifying. Gruesome. Just like, but that's led to renewed efforts in Washington State and elsewhere. Things that have already been happening elsewhere really buoyed that up, getting that to the forefront. So talking about that, lots of great stuff. So if you head over to stnonline.com, click on our magazine section, digital editions, you'll find all the good word there.
Thanks for that, Ryan. Yeah, lots happening this last week. I know the NASDPTS illegal passing survey has returned. You want to give listeners a little bit of an update on that?
Yeah, well, it's been a few years now. I mean, basically since going back to 2019 that we had that survey. So that started in 2011. So really, this should be the 11th or 12th year of it. But it took a hiatus, as a lot of things did with COVID. So earlier last month, NASDPTS released that they will be working with all the different states. Now, this is a voluntary survey, but around 25 to 30 states seem to be participating every year. Very similar to a lot of the feedback that we get when we send out surveys to states. It's those 25 or 30 that are really active in the industry and responding to these kind of things. So we're looking at illegal passing. So again, it's voluntary. School bus drivers, where they are participating, where they're able to participate, are trying to note all instances of motorists passing school buses illegally at bus stops. Kind of, harkens back to the old days, Tony. If you remember way back when, a lot of drivers hanging next to them in the school bus would have like a notepad or a binder where they would physically try to write down license plates.
Good luck with that. Good luck.
Like those days before video, there's so much video now. I still hear some school bus drivers are doing that. Well, basically what this survey does is it asks them to record all these instances. And in the last survey that NASDPTS kind of pulled together, it had 107,000 school bus drivers. So roughly a quarter to a fifth reported that 81,841 vehicles illegally passed buses in 31 states. NASDPTS extrapolated that this would equate to 17 million violations occurring nationwide over a 180-day school year. So those stats have really been picked up by a lot of folks in both safety advocacy and in the government levels, in both state and the federal. So really trying to shine light on that illegal passing problem. So we should be seeing some results from those surveys a little bit later this summer.
I mean, regardless of what the survey shows, that's pretty obvious that there is a clear danger in the loading and unloading zone, especially on illegal passing, right? Like these numbers, they haven't changed. If not, they've probably gotten worse over the years. I think it's relative based on how many people are reporting, but clearly 17 million violations in a 180-day school year as an extrapolation. That's a ton. I was talking to my wife the other day and she was just driving down the road. She said, a school bus is parked and the stop sign's out and people are just passing it. And she's like, it's unbelievable. No one stops. I think it really comes down to the lack of awareness of drivers that I don't think that they do it on purpose. I think, frankly, they just don't know the rules of the road around school buses. And there's just such a lack of education to the consumer who's just John Q. driver out there, and who knows what they're being told or what they know, because I'm sure they took their driver's test 30 years ago and they don't know these things, right? There's no refresh.
That wasn't even asked on my test when I was 16, 17 years old. But, it's one of those issues again of public awareness, and realizing that, hey, school buses, they have that stop arm. But what does that mean? Here in the industry, we know what it means. Their state laws are very precise about it. But again, people don't know. And what happens when you come across a transit bus that's stopped on the side? Everyone goes around it because there is no law requiring you to stop for transit buses. And unfortunately, many people out there, you mentioned John Q. Motoring Public, they don't really see the difference between the two, especially if their kids aren't riding school buses. And we're going to talk about California in a second, but California, has per capita the fewest number of students riding school buses nationwide, despite having the most public K-12 kids that there are, 6.5 million. So it's just a lack of knowledge, essentially. And I think surveys like this are trying to shine the light. But, we need the general public to really pick up on this. And I know that when these surveys come out, the industry does a pretty good job of attracting the attention of the mainstream media and Good Morning America, Today's Show. Everything's really right now focused on electric buses, but certainly we need to remember why those buses are on the road in the first place and why we need electric buses. It's for the kids. So we got to keep them safe. School bus has a great safety record. Sometimes there's things out of the school bus driver's control, but a lot of times there's things within the school bus driver's control. So how can we utilize all of these instances and sometimes tragic incidences to make the industry better and make kids safer?
Ryan, there was one mom in Tennessee that I read about on our own website, reported by WATE News in Tennessee. Alicia Hurst, mother of 16-year-old student, decided to get out in front of traffic and stop moving vehicles to try to make her point that people should not be illegally passing school buses. Like, she literally was going out there, super dangerous, by the way. Do not recommend doing that. But it got the attention of local police who are increasing their presence around school buses and really trying to address the problem. So parents are kind of taking it upon themselves of these students to really like do some really aggressive things. Clearly not safe getting in front of moving cars, but she got the point across, I guess, and really kind of gave the local community a bit of a wake-up call. So you guys can read more about that on the STN Online website. Tennessee mother steps in front of vehicles passing school buses. Pretty bold headline there, but the reality is, I guess it's going to take bold moves to get people's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of attention, Tony, the EPA has garnered a lot of attention lately with the new clean school bus program that's rolling out. $5 billion over 5 years. We've reported so much on that. I mean, everyone in the industry, they're kind of been waited with bated breath. Well, last week, EPA announced that, hey, lo and behold, the program is finally starting to roll out. It was supposed to begin, if you remember from some of our reporting earlier this year, last month in April. Well, they announced it's going to be now coming out this month in May, probably a little bit later this month. So we are all with bated breath awaiting that. But one thing we do know, Tony, is, supposedly, or what the bipartisan infrastructure law really passed and has in it is of this $5 billion, that means over 5 years, that's $1 billion a year. Split that in half, $500 million for zero emissions, which, means electric school buses, and another $500 million for low emission school buses or zero emission school buses. So we're talking propane, CNG, potentially, you could get some money for electric again. I think it's trying to create an open end for maybe some other technologies, looking at renewable fuels maybe eventually. Well, EPA came out and said this rebate program that's starting this month, while there's $1 billion to spend in this fiscal year, only $500 million is going to be rolled out initially anyways for this rebate program for both electric and low emissions. What does that mean? Essentially, a little birdie told me last week that the EPA is perhaps a bit concerned in rolling it out just exactly what the subscription to the application will be, meaning how many people are going to apply. That remains to be seen, but certainly, judging by the conversation that you and I have been having, that we've been having with others for the past, 6 months, certainly a lot of interest. But, something we've also talked about, Tony, a lot of times there's some hesitancy in going after some of these funds for whatever reason, feeling it's too much work, wondering what strings are attached, how sustainable is it? I mean, we had that conversation recently on the podcast about the emergency connectivity funds from the FCC for Wi-Fi. We had that conversation in the magazine several months ago when it comes to Medicaid reimbursement. So again, really we'll see what happens over the next month. But EPA is apparently saying, hey, we're going to limit the funding initially. But again, the thought is that they're going to be releasing some money later on in the year. Originally, there was talk about, in addition to this rebate, maybe a different competitive grant in the fall. Then that was quashed. Maybe that's back on. We just have to wait and see what EPA has planned.
Yeah, I get my news from STNonline.com, and I was reading the story that you authored and talked about this program. And, frankly, it looks really scary to me, right? Like there's all these stipulations, like you have to have certain buses of a certain age and you have to sunset those buses. So if you don't have buses that are older than 2010 and you can get rid of those, then you basically aren't eligible, right? Or, you're not higher up on the lottery scale. And then there's also the fact that you have to be in a socioeconomic depressed area. You have to be in a rural area. Oh, by the way, you can only get 25 buses. Okay, well, 25 buses is not going to scratch the surface of somebody that has 250, or, maybe there are a lot of rural districts out there that 25 to 50 buses is kind of what the average is. But are they going to look at this and say, is electric the right use case for my district? Like, one, do I have the infrastructure? Can I get the infrastructure? And I think they're allotting $20,000 for each bus that's allocated, at least that's how I understood it, for infrastructure, right? So if you get 25 buses, 25 times 20,000, that's your infrastructure allocation above and beyond that 5 billion, right? So that's a separate bucket of money. But regardless, these are all really big what ifs. If you're going to pull the lever and do electric, right? You're all in. You got to have all this other things set up. And what's the impact of the grid? What's it going to do? If the grid's struggling in California and New York, what if every school bus goes electric? Then what? How does that work? We have to consider all the other ramifications of, do you put solar on your school buses? I know the talk of like a big roof with solar panels on it. It seems crazy. It's not really been done, but man, the use case may be there where you've got to have some solar on your bus, or, maybe you've got solar on your school facilities. So there's all this other thing. I know LCFS credits, right, which is the low carbon credits that you get if you invest in this stuff. It's only eligible in the West Coast in certain states, California, Washington, I believe, is it Oregon, Ryan?
Oregon's been trying to write legislation. I know New York is among those states as well. So it's a growing trend. I think there's a lot of interest in it, but yeah, to date, California was really the first, and then Washington State.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with regards to all this stuff. And I think everybody's drinking from the fire hose, just trying to get as much information as they can to make an informed decision. And, we may go back to the old propane, tried and true. Maybe EV is not the right fuel choice. Maybe propane's the right fuel choice. And it's less expensive, lower cost, CapEx cost to get into that vehicle. And you get a much larger piece of funding, but the funding varies, right? They've got this funding table that, certain things get certain money, and there's all that kind of table. If you guys go over to stnonline.com, you can kind of get a look-see at the funding table that we've put up, and it will give you all the information you need to be able to navigate this EPA funding that's coming down the pipeline for the Clean School Bus Act. So highly recommend you go check that out on the website and dive in. I had to read it 2 or 3 times to kind of just, soak it all in, just because there's so much detail and so much minutia that, you kind of get lost in it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually the EPA article that was written by our very own Taylor Hannon. So she did a great job, very thorough in that reporting. Meanwhile, there were, same day as that webinar from the EPA, 2 senators and 2 representatives in Washington, D.C. that have been championing electric school buses for several years now. They sent a letter to the Senate and House Appropriations Committees to ask for another $300 million that's going to be tied up in this Interior, Environment, and Related Energies Appropriations Bill. So that's about $43.4 billion. So 300 million, hey, that's kind of a drop in the bucket. But what they want to do is they say, hey, you know what? This clean school bus program, and you just said the word, I think just a minute ago, Tony, scratching the surface of what we need to do. Because, just crunching the numbers, I put in an article on STNonline.com talking about this letter. It's from Senators Alex Padilla of California and Raphael Warnock of Georgia, as well as Representatives Tony Cardenas of California and Johanna Hayes of Connecticut. So these are some of the authors of that $25 billion for electric school buses that some of you saw in legislation a couple of years back. There was talk that it was going to be rolled up under this Build Back Better plan that never came to fruition. That kind of Build Back Better kind of imploded before it could even get off the ground. So that $25 billion bill this group actually reintroduced that bill 2 weeks ago. And then they followed up with this request for the appropriations. But in looking again at that $5 billion, you're talking about, roughly, if you're looking at, on average, say $300,000, $350,000 for a bus. I know the smaller ones are more like $250,000, but let's just use a round number like 6,750 or 7,000 electric buses that'll come from these funds. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less for electric. That's including the chargers. It's probably more like 15,000 propane powered buses, give or take. When you look at that $2.5 billion that for the low emissions, $2.5 billion for electric. So when you're talking less than 25,000 buses, 22,000 buses, let's say, that's not a lot, right? I mean, we already know that There's about right now, say 1,500 electric buses on the road, maybe a little bit high. We know that, with the pipeline buses that are being promised, more like 1,800 to 2,000. And, what we're hearing from a lot of folks is a lot of orders have been delayed. We have the supply chain shortages, the microchips and those microprocessors for vehicles really being the thorn in the side of the automotive industry right now, more so than anything. And saw a report last week that this is going to be ongoing well into next year. And certain buses are not available, or they're not the right fit. What's available on the market now, or what was on the market in December or January when a lot of school districts were buying these buses, they didn't fit their use case. We have Teresa Fleming, who's the executive director of transportation for the School District of Philadelphia, speaking in Reno about their electric project, which, by the way, their pilot project was supposed to start last week and has been delayed. But, operating a school bus, Tony, in downtown Philadelphia is a lot different than even operating it in Los Angeles. Certainly different than operating it in some place like Red Bluff, California, up in Northern California, where actually Zach Pierce, who's the director of transportation, will also be speaking alongside Teresa. So, juxtaposing the large Philadelphia school district with tiny 25 bus school district in Northern California, obviously different terrains, and, you need different buses to navigate narrow streets in Philadelphia, where the first order of buses that came in, it's not really what they needed, but they took them because they needed an electric bus. They needed to get ready for this pilot project. So there's really a lot to chew on here. And, as this program unveils this month and the rebate program starts, there's going to be a lot of great conversations, believe me, in Indianapolis and Reno, because that's the wheelhouse, right? Everyone's going to be trying to finalize their applications around that time. So will really be interesting, the questions that we hear from folks as they try to drill down and figure out what they're going to do next.
Yeah, I was talking with one district in New York up in the Buffalo area, Jim Nestico, and Jim and I were talking about, what New York is doing. And there's 47,000 school buses in New York, and they're saying all electric, and you need to be going all electric starting in 2027. So really, if you look at the replacement cycle, to replace that many buses based on what your extrapolation was, based on $2.5 billion, they're not even going to get close with the money. I mean, New York State taxpayers are going to have to come up with $2.5 billion for the next 10 years to even get close to that number. So, this isn't some unfunded mandate that they can just throw down on the school districts. There's no way they can survive that. They're going to have to subsidize it with tax dollars and bond measures. There's just no other way. It's unrealistic. And the fact that they think they're going to build that many, I don't care if every manufacturer is building at full capacity, there's no way they're going to be able to hit those numbers in reality because of all the supply chain shortages. And there's a lot of other people that want this technology too. So it's not going to go all to one state. Now, granted, there's a lot there, and you're probably going to see a lot of new manufacturers, as we already have, enter the market. But is there going to be the appropriate battery technology infrastructure? I mean, when you think of New York, land is expensive. The way they park these buses in New York is very different than they park in rural areas. So what does that really mean? And is it tangible and feasible? Now, the federal money, if they only get 25 buses, well, that's not going to get them over the finish line at all in New York. So the taxpayer is going to have to bear the burden of this, and it's a really big deal. And like I mentioned before, what's the stretch on the actual grid? Is the national grid even prepared to take on something of this caliber? I mean, it's great to say, hard to do. So I'm really curious in the next few years how this thing shakes out, Ryan. But I mean, I know you said, a couple years the supply chain is going to be worked out. Man, I think it's going to be farther than that. I mean, Judith Crawford last week, CEO Beacon Mobility, she said she's putting her order now, and she's not expecting those buses till 23, 24. And that's just for regular buses, right? Diesel vehicles. So when you start to have other vehicles that are specialty, like EV-based solutions, that's a totally different ballgame. So I'm really, really kind of with a grain of salt on some of this, but I really think it's the long game for EV in this market. And I really do think propane is going to thrive significantly based on the accessibility of technology. And I think that we might be really surprised with what we see in the marketplace going forward, but big changes ahead.
Especially as we've seen CNG really fall off the map. I mean, I think it was maybe 3 dozen CNG buses that were built. We reported in our 2021 buyer's guide. So yeah, you're looking at electric, you're looking at propane. I think we have some fringe renewables. We're gonna have a conversation about that in Reno, but that's kind of more been a West Coast thing, frankly, so far. Like a lot of things are when they first start. I think that those markets will mature. I was talking to somebody the other day that about, I think, over 1 billion gallons of renewable diesel have already been domestically produced in the past year. And that's just going to exponentially grow as more refineries come online for that fuel. You have renewable propane, getting back to propane. I think that's also where you're going to see the zero emissions really come to fruition first alongside electric. Still, obviously, yes, there is no zero emission from birth to the tailpipe, talking about from the mining standpoint all the way through. So, there's a lot of detractors from that standpoint too, but you're exactly right. The grid really needs to get figured out. We have rolling blackouts, brownouts, whatever you want to call them, here in California. We're coming up on fire season. These are a lot of questions that people are having, and hopefully we can start peeling back the onion a little bit and having some fruitful discussions around these topics in Reno and Indy.
Yeah. Speaking of California, Ryan, what's the update on the legislation requiring full reimbursement for student transportation? Has that gone anywhere? Has that died? What's the deal on that?
Well, actually, it's 2 bills. So earlier this year, we reported on SB 878, which was introduced by Senator Nancy Skinner. She's known for the nation's first free school lunch program that was passed last year. So she's got a lot of political capital and she's spending it. Let me tell you, so we reported on this in March that she has got 878, and that would basically mandate, that's right, talking about unfunded mandates, mandate all transportation for all kids, student transportation, school bus, other modes. That's, let me tell you, that's a feat. And California, I was mentioning earlier, they have 6.5 million K through 12 public student enrollment. Most in the nation. That's 1 million more than Texas has. That's the number 2 state when it comes to the number of K through 12 kids. But on a per capita basis, like I mentioned, California has the fewest riders on school buses. So this dates back, Tony, this has been a problem going back, decades. Funding for transportation has basically not changed much since the 80s. And so really what you've seen is a lot of school districts, especially what we saw this during the Great Recession, if they didn't have to do transportation, they cut it. Some school districts try to cut transportation across the board. And of course, you can't do that if you have students with IEPs that are protected under federal law. But a lot of districts, they only provide special needs transportation because of this. They just don't have the money. Well, Skinner is trying to change that by mandating. But there's another bill that was introduced about a week after Nancy Skinner did in January. The first week of February, Assemblymember Patrick O'Donnell introduced AB 2933. And that has gotten a lot of press lately, especially last week. Both bills actually moved forward to what's called the suspension file or the suspense file, where programs basically go when they cost more than $150,000, and both of these would definitely cost more than $150,000. So the appropriation committees in both the Assembly and the Senate are going to be voting on the fates of these bills later next month. But what AB 2933 does, it's different than from Skinner's Senate bill, is it's talking about 100% reimbursement. So it's not a mandate. It's actually looking at giving 100% reimbursement for home to school transportation, along with a cost of living adjustment each year.
Show me the money, Ryan. That's like huge, right? Because everything's unfunded. So show me the money. Let's see what happens.
Exactly. And this would fund it. California, like a lot of states, is running a huge budget surplus right now. In fact, the legislative analyst office announced last week that it's about $68 billion budget surplus. Earlier this year, Governor Gavin Newsom said it was going to be more like $29 billion. Well, that's quite a jump. So they have a lot of money. They're looking to spend it. But with every great positive headline, there's a potential gray cloud on the horizon. That same legislative analyst office, they said that despite strong tax collections, because that's really the reason for these surpluses, they're warning that their simulations point to a budget deficit as early as 25-26. So we're talking about spending all these bills and giving school bus its due, which it needs, school transportation its due. But then you worry, okay, what happens if we can fund this for a couple years and then we go into a big deficit? Then what? I think that's always, especially in the student transportation industry, that's people's always their worst fear. And that comes back to what I talked about earlier, Tony, with, I think some of the fear about going after some of this money. It's like, is it going to be there tomorrow? What, we get our hopes up. And then we have to break the news to our administration that, oops, I know what we said, that we wouldn't need money anymore for that, but guess what? So, it's interesting, though, the different tacks that these two bills are taking. Maybe, some of the folks I've talked to, we might see them join at some point. We also have the budget process ongoing right now. That's going to get voted on in June. There's a potential that it could get rolled up under the state budget. So, pretty interesting. So we're going to be definitely waiting to see what California does with these bills.
That's right. Wait and see, Ryan. But we're not going to solve all the world's problems today on the podcast, but we could at the STN EXPO. So make sure you guys head out there, stnexpo.com. Check that out. We have Ryan talking with Jason Hewlett here coming up next. Looking forward to that conversation.
Welcome, everybody, to the School Transportation Nation stage. Jason Hewlett, keynote extraordinaire. Many of you might have met him in Reno in December. Jason will be joining us, STN EXPO Indianapolis in June. Jason, so good to see you again, my friend.
Ryan, great to be with you, my friend. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. And boy, let me tell you, Jason is a sight to behold for all the good ways. What a talent. Really has some great things in store for our folks in Indy. We talked about this previously, Jason. It was really a pleasant surprise when we met you in Reno last year. We pushed the conference back from July to December because of this whole COVID thing. But you originally were not on the docket, and you filled in for a good friend of yours. It's NBA playoff season time. It's a great segue to talk about the great Mark Eaton, the late great Mark Eaton, a good friend of yours. Tell us a little bit about Mark and how you came to speak at STN EXPO Reno to begin with.
Yeah, the late, great Mark Eaton, great way to say it. I'll tell you, this great man passed away last May of 2021. And of course, being this all-star that he was and an Hall of Fame speaker, the fact that he passed away and he was on your schedule to come and speak, he's a very dear friend of mine. I grew up with him. And in fact, I grew up so close to him that when he was drafted to the Utah Jazz, he moved into our neighborhood. And I got to babysit his kids. He gave me my first puppy when his dog had puppies. In fact, when I got my Eagle Scout, he spoke at that ceremony for me. So this man and I go way back. And of course, he was my hero as a basketball star for the Utah Jazz, whom I love. And so the Jazz are in the playoffs now, by the way. I hope by the time this launches, they're still around. But I'll tell you, Mark Eaton, when he suddenly passed away last year, it was a shock to everybody. And I went to his family and I said, hey, is there any way that I could help fill in for any of the speeches that he has on his calendar? And they were like, well, yeah, I guess you could try and see if they'll have you. And that was a really difficult thing to reach out to clients and ask, can I come and fill in? And some just said, no way, we don't want anybody else. But STN, you guys are awesome. And you took a chance on an unknown speaker and let me come in and fill in while you still sent the check along to his family. Mark Eaton's family was still paid, which is what we were really hoping for. And so Their family was taken care of. Your audience was taken care of by me. And it was a great honor to be able to honor my friend who was hopefully looking from a giant mansion above. He was 7'4". So obviously he has a big mansion in the earth and in heaven above, I believe. And so it was a cool thing to be able to do that for him.
Yeah. Literally big shoes to fill, and you filled them quite nicely, Jason. I remember you telling that story about your Eagle Scout ceremony and Mark showing up. Boy, you must have been the most popular kid in school or in the neighborhood in your community for some time after that.
I actually tell the story that we had just moved to a new community. So we went from a place called Park City, Utah, a big ski area where Mark lived and I grew up. And I moved to a new town about 30 minutes away. I went to this new town and I had no friends. I had no popularity. And that's when I invited him to come in. And I said, I have no friends. It would be really helpful if you'd come. And because he lives the 4 commitments of a winning team, one of those is to protect your teammates. Mark Eaton came, and yes, you're totally right, Ryan. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, how does this kid know the all-star Mark Eaton legend? And it really did help me become at least a little popular that day.
A little popular that day. Well, again, you've segued into quite a nice career for yourself. So again, I think that folks who come to Indy in June, they're going to be in for a sweet treat, if you will. And I don't want to give away too much, but let me just say, Jason, you're a showstopper. So, as he laughs there.
What's your definition of showstopper?
You stop the show, a funny story. I think I mentioned this with Tony on one of our podcasts previously, but because again, I had, this all kind of happened, and, I think it was about 2 months or it was last spring when Mark passed away, and it was on ESPN. I remember my phone blowing up, and I was like, what? You see that? And you literally, I know what we're planning. And I'm like, Tony, did you see what just happened? And first thing, of course, is you feel for his family. What a shock. As that kind of wears off, though, you, of course, go to, okay, what are we going to do? So when this all came about, and by the way, there were a number of Mark's friends that stepped up to the plate. I think we had about a half dozen, 8 maybe speakers who stepped up and said, hey, we are here. We've gotten together. We've talked about this. We want to honor Mark's commitments. So again, what a testimony to someone when you have friends and colleagues willing to do that. So, fast forward to when we were doing the mic check, and a couple of our staff were in the room, and I walked in with my coffee, and I knew a little bit about what Jason was going to do, but I saw some of the looks on some of our associates' faces when you were warming up, and that was priceless, man. It was great.
Well, what I do is quite unique, and we can share some of it because we would never give all of it away before Indianapolis. But I'll tell you, It was so funny to watch the faces because I can see what's going on too. And I could see people going, is this what he's going to do for a keynote address? Because I was singing, and my background is Las Vegas. I worked with the Legends in concert. And so I was up there. I think I was probably doing the Bee Gees impression or something. Is that what it may have been like?
I think it was. Yes,
I was like,
yes.
Stay alive, oh, stay alive, ha, 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 stay alive. And I could see everyone's face like, how is this going to go with our people? And then you came in and Tony came in and you guys were like, oh yeah, this is going to go down in history as a fun one.
Absolutely. Yeah. So The Promise is the title of Jason's keynote. That's going to be Monday, June 6th at the Indianapolis Convention Center, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. We want to see you there. Hopefully we kind of primed the pump, if you will. So, Jason, one of the things that you also do, and give everybody your website real quick too.
Website is jasonhewlett.com, and Hewlett spelled like Hewlett Packard, Hewlett. So
that's very important.
If your people want to go check it out, that'd be great.
You're a blogger as well. And what's always impressive to me, because everybody, has a blog, especially if you're a speaker or a consultant, or, you got to have a blog, right? But I go to so many blogs and, they haven't been updated in 6 months or a year or 2 years. Jason, you are regular, man. You're writing it once a week, every Tuesday or whatever that day it is. It's like clockwork. And, you write a lot about current events, and we've had several current events in our popular culture recently. One of them, the slap heard around the world. I don't even think I have to explain what I mean, but of course, Will Smith and his incident with Chris Rock at the Oscars. I really I follow you on LinkedIn. I'm reading your blogs every week. Give everybody a little bit of insight on, what you are seeing out there in the world, and how do you relate it to what's going on in business, in student transportation in general?
Yeah, well, hey, let me tell you, Ryan, that means a whole lot from a journalist like yourself to say, hey, I appreciate the consistent blog, even if you might see 0 comments or 20 comments, that's part of the practice, which I call the promise, which is you do what you say you're going to do, and your readers are expecting something. So every Sunday morning, my blog post comes out, and then, of course, I share it throughout the week. But thank you for acknowledging that. In terms of the promise itself within current events, my goodness, there's all kinds of things happening throughout the world at all times where people break their word or don't keep their promise, or other times when they do. I like to really acknowledge when somebody does. And then there's times like Will Smith slapping Chris Rock in the face, and we're like, wait a minute, that's a promise broken by a future Oscar winner, as in 5 minutes later, winning an Oscar, going up and slapping someone on stage. It was just uncalled for, unprecedented, really, for someone to make a joke. Obviously, it was not a tasteful one about Will Smith's wife, and I don't know if Chris Rock knew what he was saying, but you never know. And I'll tell you what, I talked about the promise to slap him back was how I led with it. And people were shocked that I was calling Chris Rock to slap him back. My slap him back was not physical. It was the slap him back that Chris Rock effectively did by saying nothing. He did nothing. All he did was apologize right away and say, I'm just telling a joke. I'll stop saying that. And my gosh, he slapped him back with kindness, with ethics, with not saying anything derogatory back to Will Smith. I'm telling you, he came out on top on this thing. And I was very impressed with how Chris Rock handled it. And I think that everybody listening might think to themselves, whether you're in transportation and the kid is bugging you behind you, obviously you're not going to smack the kid. But what I'm saying is, how are you showing up in your performance every day? Each of us are performers. We all have a promise to make and to keep, whether it's to the parents who pay our bills, to the people that, are our employers and our coworkers. How are we showing up on time for the bus call? Are we showing up every single kid that walks on that bus? Are we that person that can keep our promise to be like, you know what? I have something extraordinary that makes me unique. That's how I'm the legendary leader that they're never going to forget. Whether you're the bus driver, whether you're the one managing everybody and making sure they're where they're supposed to be, and sometimes filling in for those who don't show up, who break their promise. So we'll talk more about that, but leading it back to pop culture, there's a lot going on. And it's interesting if you look through the world through the lens of promise and to say who's making and keeping and sometimes breaking that promise.
That's right. Well, check out, again, jasonhewlett.com, spelled like the computer, Hewlett. But yeah, what struck me with that whole incident real quickly was, and especially when reading your blog, Chris Rock was really fulfilling his promise, because as a comedian and an observational comedian, that's what he was doing. And that's when, and we all know what these award shows are meant to do. They bring on these comedians, whether they're running the whole show or they're coming up and presenting. That's what they're there for. So it was just really shocking. But what you're talking about really is turning the other cheek, and that's so hard. I know that's a spiritual and religious principle that so many of us live by, but it's not so easy when it happens right in front of you and you have to make that split second judgment, right?
Yeah, so often people want to fight back and our ego takes over, but really our ego is temporary. We can say to ourselves, I make a promise to live a life of joy, to serve others, to be a light. And there is so much darkness in the world. If we can be that shining light for other people, it'll make all the difference in the way that the world responds in a humanitarian type of a way, whether it's business, family, community, you name it. And STN is a light. I believe you guys are. You guys are doing great work. You're bringing people together. You're spreading joy and bringing in speakers like myself to say, hey, let's live at a higher level. Let's do some promise leadership. And that's what I love about it.
Right on. Looking forward to it. So in addition to being a speaker and an entertainer, Jason, you are an author. Of course, we talked about your blogs, but you have a book aptly named The Promise. So check that out. If you go to the jasonhewlett.com, you can find more information on that. I'm sure you're on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and everywhere you can buy books these days. But, being a writer, I always say, and in fact, I had this conversation with one of my staff last week about writing. And to be a great writer, you got to be a great reader, a voracious reader. You got to be, it's not just about you putting your pen to paper or your fingertips to keypad. It's about reading and, consuming other people's perspectives and viewpoints and thoughts. You are a voracious reader. Tell us what's on your nightstand right now. What are you gobbling up that's helping you with your craft and being able to connect those dots with your attendees, your readers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to even look at my phone to make sure I'm telling you correctly, because what's so cool about books now is not only do you have it on your nightstand in physical book form, you've got ebooks, Audible books, you've got all kinds of stuff. So in my Audible, I'm listening to Jordan Peterson, who is a great philosopher from Canada. He's got 12 Rules for Life, and this just is knocking me out. I love it. There's another one by John Maxwell called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And then, I love this one. Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last. And some of these are so good. And then if you want to just kind of more of a relaxing one, but just really a killer Audible, Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. I think this guy might win a Grammy for this thing. It is so well done. So those are some of the ones that I'm reading right now. And I think I'm probably reading 2 books a week or so. And between Audible and the physical books on my nightstand, I'm also putting together a podcast with a friend where we're reading the books of our peers. And then we're having the peers come on and we're kind of shredding the peers a little bit to ask them how they came up with that book concept. And it's called Sound Wisdom with Jess and Jason. So that'll be coming out soon.
Okay, great. Well, definitely let us know when that comes out. I'll be checking that out. And I'm going to be checking out these books that you're reading. I'll add those to my own reading list. And you're right. My wife, I got her a Kindle last year. So literally she has that on her nightstand. So, it's and she listens and so much of my reading. I'm doing a ton of reading myself. Great books. You should really check out Green Eggs and Ham.
Yeah.
Junie B. Jones. So I have 2 little ones at home and some of you out there that have little ones. Some of those titles, of course, Dr. Seuss, everyone knows. But so, and of course, with everything we're doing here at STN, trying to stay on top of the news and lots of reports and whatnot, nonfiction. It's great stuff. So, hey, Jason, so looking forward to seeing you in person again next month in Indianapolis and you unveiling the promise to everyone. So thanks so much again for coming on and appreciate you, my friend.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. We really appreciate it. And I'm excited to inspire your folks and make sure that they not only set a goal, but make and keep a great promise. So we'll see you then.
All right. See you then. Thanks again, Jason. And a shout out to my co-host, Tony. Can't wait to see everyone at STN EXPO Indy in June. And thanks to Transfinder for sponsoring this episode. You can visit stnonline.com for the latest on everything going on in the school bus industry. Learn about all of our upcoming shows at stnexpo.com and register for STN EXPO Indy and Reno. And stream, follow, and tell your friends about this podcast. You can find it at stnpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And don't forget, we love those 5-star ratings. All right, friends, thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.